Mike Hosking, Marcus Lush, Pete Wolfcamp, Heather Duplessis-Allen. All the names you can trust. This is News Talk ZB News.
It's 10 o'clock. I'm Diana Vesich. The Prime Minister has denied concerns over any US backlash if New Zealand did recognise Palestine. Foreign Minister Winston Peters told the UN General Assembly we won't be recognising the state, saying the conditions aren't right and it won't help. Our closest ally, Australia, has recognised Palestine, joining in the likes of around 150 other countries. Chris Luxon says for New Zealand to recognise the state, it would require conditions including removing Hamas and returning the Israeli hostages.
We're going to do everything we can to buttress and build the Palestinian Authority, but at the moment we have a Hamas in government and that is unacceptable for us to recognise any state that has a terrorist organisation in it.
Meanwhile, geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller told Francesca Rudkin New Zealand's decision overlooks the IDF's current actions in Gaza.
The whole point is why states are recognising a Palestinian state right now is that Israel is doing its utmost to try and make a state impossible.
Keep it simple. It's Sunday, the Sunday Session with Francesca Rudkin and Whitcoulls for the best selection of great reads. News Talk ZB.
9:14. So the government has finally announced New Zealand's position on the Palestine statehood. Talking from the UN General Assembly yesterday, Foreign Minister Winston Peters said Palestine did not meet the criteria of a state.
Because statehood recognition is an instrument for peace. As an instrument for peace, also does not play, because there are no fully legitimate and viable state of Palestine to recognise.
Prime Minister Christopher Luxon also spoke to media about the decision.
We're going to do everything we can to buttress and build the Palestinian Authority, but at the moment we have a Hamas in government and that is unacceptable for us to recognise any state that has a terrorist organisation in it.
To talk us through it, I'm joined by geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller. Good morning, Geoffrey.
Good morning, Francesca.
Wondering if I can ask you this question first up. Does international recognition bring Palestine any closer to statehood?
Well, it is symbolic in a sense, recognition. In a sense, Winston Peters is correct that you do not have a viable state at this moment to recognise that there are no agreed borders, there's no capital, there's no international airport, there's no army and so on. All the trappings of a state, in a sense, are absent. But the whole point is why states are recognising a Palestinian state right now is that Israel is doing its utmost to try and make a state of Palestine impossible. And Benjamin Netanyahu, who spoke several hours before Winston Peters did yesterday, was clear that he would never accept a Palestinian state. He said it would be national suicide to allow the creation of a Palestinian state. So I think the argument in favour of recognising a Palestinian state is very much to back that two-state solution and to show commitment to the creation of a Palestinian state. And it is the majority position here. 157 states out of 193 in the UN have now recognised a Palestinian state. So New Zealand is an outlier in the international community by taking this position.
So were you surprised by the stance New Zealand's taken here?
Yes, I was, because New Zealand really is outside the mainstream. And it's outside the mainstream in terms of those figures I gave you, 157 states recognising a Palestinian state, and it's out of sync with its close partners like Australia, like the United Kingdom, like Canada. And these are states with which New Zealand has worked quite closely when it comes to its positions on the war in Gaza. Since October 7th, New Zealand has signed a number of joint statements with Australia and Canada, for example, and with the United Kingdom. It's worked very closely with those three countries. So I am surprised. And also domestically, if you look at polling, we did have that recent Reid Research poll that showed 42% of New Zealanders were in favour of recognising a Palestinian state, 22% against, around a third didn't know. But there is a plurality there, 42% who were in favour of recognition of a Palestinian state. So it is a little surprising.
Yes, I understand that, if you're a government that represents the people, then, you've got to be listening to the people and things. But we also shouldn't be making decisions based on what our allies or other people are doing. We should be making our own decisions too, shouldn't we?
Well, that's true, and decisions should not necessarily be a popularity contest in international relations. And there are some arguments in favour of holding off with recognition. And Winston Peters made that case yesterday in the details of his speech, setting out all of these reasons that the that you did have Hamas there still in charge in Gaza, that you didn't have a viable state to recognise and so on. He was saying very much, and he used these words, it's when, not if, New Zealand recognises a Palestinian state. So it's not that New Zealand is against a Palestinian state. And to the contrary, I think New Zealand is in favour of it, just not right now. That's the position from Winston Peters. The problem I think the government will have is that I don't think anyone in the international community, international observers, will be overly interested in the fine print and the detail of New Zealand's position. They'll simply be looking at the map, and they'll say that New Zealand is one of a small group of countries that have sided with Israel here. And you had the Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister overnight celebrating New Zealand's position, calling it an example of moral courage and common sense. And I think a lot of countries, and this goes particularly for New Zealand's friends and partners in the Middle East, they'll be perplexed and puzzled and disappointed by this decision by New Zealand, and they will see New Zealand as siding with Israel, which is against the creation of a Palestinian state, full stop, even if that is not New Zealand's position.
That's the issue. I certainly, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, you're right. We all want the same outcome. We all want the same thing to happen. We want the violence to stop. We want a ceasefire. We want aid to get in. We want to be able to work towards this two-state solution. It's just how we get there that sort of is the difference, really, isn't it?
And indeed, I think New Zealand has spoken out quite strongly, and Winston Peters has spoken out quite strongly, quite eloquently, many times since October the 7th. He called it an utter catastrophe last year at the United Nations, what is unfolding in Gaza. I think there's immense frustration at what is happening in Gaza and the war. Christopher Luxon came out yesterday and said New Zealand is pro-peace and wants a ceasefire and wants the war to end. I do think there is an argument that New Zealand, if it is going to take this position, and if New Zealand is going to hold off recognising a Palestinian state, there's an argument that New Zealand needs to become more involved in the nitty-gritty of peacemaking, rather than just calling for peace from the safety of the South Pacific, maybe taking a more active role in the ceasefire negotiations, the peacemaking efforts. Now, that's a thankless task, and many have been burnt in the past by getting involved in this. I'm not saying New Zealand at all should be doing this on its own. It needs to work with its partners, particularly in the Middle East and around the world. But I think New Zealand can play a small but significant part as a small state that does get on reasonably well with both sides. And Christopher Luxon said that yesterday, that New Zealand's a friend to both sides. Well, if we're a friend to both sides, I think we need to sort this war out pronto and get involved and become more active. I think Winston Peters is a pretty experienced foreign minister now. He's been foreign minister 3 times. He does have the statesman-like persona that he likes to present on the international stage. I think there would be an opportunity if he wanted to, and if New Zealand wanted to commit resources to New Zealand becoming a bit more actively involved in the peacemaking process.
Because, of course, yesterday, he did call for more action, less words, yet we've really just offered words. And I was curious to know, is there any action that New Zealand can do to make a difference? And you've pointed out a way that we could assist here. What about sanctions, though? I mean, can that have an impact at all?
Look, sanctions
and trade bans, travel bans, tariffs, things like that.
Look, New Zealand has put travel bans on Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister of Israel, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister. Look, there are extremist settlers that you could put sanctions on, but I don't think any of these things are really going to change things overly. The European Union is looking at tariffs on Israeli products. We're looking at the moment, there's a drive to ban Israel from the Eurovision Song Contest and so forth. Look, the history of sanctions in international relations is not particularly favourable in terms of their ability to make a difference, because it tends to galvanise the population of a state. If you look at Iran, if you look at Cuba, you look at Russia, these sanctions policies, you can put them in place, but they're usually workarounds, and they usually lead to, as I say, a galvanising of support amongst the population. So it would be an option. New Zealand might want to go down that road further, but I don't think we should kid ourselves. I don't think sanctions are going to really make a huge difference here. What would make a difference is New Zealand getting involved in the nitty-gritty of peacemaking. It might come up. You might come up with nothing in the end, and it might not work. But I don't think that's a reason not to try. And particularly after taking this position yesterday, if we're going to take the view that we're going to be even-handed here, and we're going to be a friend to both sides, and we're not going to recognise a Palestinian state because there isn't one created, because we need the war to stop first. Well, I think you've got particularly an obligation then to become more actively involved in that peacemaking ceasefire process. And there are plenty of others involved in this. Qatar, obviously, which was bombed for its trouble. Egypt. There are many across the Middle East, many states involved in this process. I think New Zealand as an outside party, as a small state, a small democracy, it could become involved in this if it chose to.
Jeffrey, really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much. That was Jeffrey Miller.